The October rain whispered against the windows of Windermere Hall, a gentle rhythm that echoed like old memories. The estate, seated deep in the golden cradle of the Berkshires, had seen 3 generations of Montgomerys rise and fall, but none quite like today. Inside the study, once a sanctum of wisdom under their father's careful watch, Eleanor Montgomery sat quietly in the chair that still bore the imprint of his presence. Her brothers stood only feet away, locked in the sort of tension that didn't need shouting to fill a room. "The Southampton beach house is mine," declared Preston, the eldest, smoothing back his hair as though appearances could justify arrogance. At 37, he wore his entitlement like his custom-tailored suits, polished, expensive, and utterly devoid of self-awareness. "You barely set foot there," Miles retorted, arms crossed. His idea of hard work involved networking over cocktails and name-dropping their family legacy. "I'm the one maintaining the place." Eleanor, 29 and invisible by their standards, remained silent. Her gaze drifted to the fogged-up glass, where raindrops traced slow, deliberate paths, each one a reminder that not all paths are straight, and not all exits are escapes. To her brothers, she was the disappointment, the daughter who rejected law school, declined a board seat, and vanished to the West Coast. They dismissed her absence as flakiness, unaware that absence, too, can be strategic. "Ellie, don't look so tense," Preston said with mock affection. "You can take the Vermont cabin. It's cozy, like you." It was a calculated slight, dressed in fraternal charm. The cabin, picturesque, yes, but modest and distant, was worth a fraction of what was being divvied up. A poetic exile. But Eleanor smiled. A secret smile, the kind that blooms only when the pieces have quietly started to align. 3 years ago, her father had summoned her to this very room. No cameras, no legal pads, just legacy talk, real, unsanitized. That conversation, still buried beneath her calm demeanor, was about to surface. A knock interrupted. Ms. Langford, Meredith's assistant, stepped in. "The video conference is ready." Eleanor glanced at her watch. 3 p.m., right on schedule. Timing, like inheritance, was everything. As the screen lit up, Meredith Langford appeared, elegant and unreadable, the family's attorney of 2 decades. Her voice, smooth as aged whiskey, addressed the room. "Good afternoon, Montgomery family. We're here to settle the estate of Mr. Harrison Montgomery." A beat of reverent silence passed. Eleanor remembered his last words to her. "They'll never see it coming, Ellie. And that's how you'll know it worked." "As you've seen, the preliminary documents were procedural," Meredith continued, eyes narrowing. "Today we follow Harrison's explicit wishes." Preston leaned forward. "We already understand the will, everything split evenly." "Not exactly," Meredith replied. "There's one matter to address first. Montgomery Industries." A tremor passed through the air. "What about the company?" Miles asked. "It was sold 3 years ago." The room fell into stunned silence. Preston blinked. "To whom?" "To Arcadia Venture Partners." Preston scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Who even are they? Dad wouldn't have sold to outsiders." "You're right," Eleanor said, voice soft but sure. "He didn't." Both heads turned toward her. She reached into her leather bag and withdrew a folder thicker than any of them expected. "Arcadia was founded 4 years ago," she said, placing it on the desk. "It's a boutique firm specializing in corporate revitalization, and I'm its CEO." Silence returned, this time louder. The storm outside began to fade, but inside Windermere Hall, the reckoning had only just begun. For a moment no one spoke. The revelation clung to the air like smoke, unseen but suffocating. Preston's laugh came sharp and brittle, the kind meant to dismiss disbelief. "You're telling us you own Montgomery Industries?" he said, eyes narrowing. "You? The dropout with a business degree and a passport full of excuses?" Eleanor remained composed. "I didn't drop out. I just didn't stay where I wasn't taken seriously." Miles looked from the folder to his sister, then back. "This has to be a bluff." "Check the signatures," she replied gently. "Every document is notarized, every transfer filed legally. Arcadia was never a secret, you just never thought to ask. Meredith folded her hands calmly. Your father appointed Eleanor as CEO of Arcadia Venture Partners 3 years ago. He sold the controlling interest of Montgomery Industries to her firm. This was not done in haste. It was the result of long consideration and deliberate planning. This is absurd, Preston barked. Dad would never do that without telling us. Eleanor stepped closer. He tried. You didn't listen. The silence returned, heavier now. I remember, she continued. Every dinner where you two dismissed his ideas. Every time you rolled your eyes at modernization, ignored him when he talked about long-term impact. You were so busy jockeying for position you didn't notice he'd already passed the torch. Miles's jaw clenched. We were his sons. And I was his legacy, Eleanor said, not unkindly. The weight of her words sank deep. It wasn't arrogance, it was accuracy, and it was far from over. Meredith pulled out a second folder. Mr. Montgomery left instructions for your continued involvement. There's a path forward for both of you. Let me guess, Preston sneered. Sweep floors and fetch coffee? Not quite, Eleanor said. You'll start in roles that reflect your degrees, Miles in finance operations, Preston in compliance, entry level. With a year of good performance, you'll regain partial ownership. Miles leaned back, stunned. Preston turned crimson. You expect us to work for you? No, Eleanor replied. I expect you to work for the company, earn what you once assumed was yours by birthright. Meredith added, These terms aren't punishment. They're an opportunity, a structured redemption plan your father insisted on. You both signed off on the mechanism during last year's policy review. At that moment, both of their phones buzzed. Simultaneously, Preston fumbled his from his blazer. What the hell? He froze. Miles looked up. Effective immediately, Eleanor said softly. Your resignations from your respective firms were submitted this morning. Prearranged, legal, precise. You had no right, Miles snapped. Dad did, Meredith interjected, and you signed the authority over to him during last year's compliance review. Again, paperwork you didn't read. Preston stood, fists clenched. You'll regret this, Ellie. Maybe, she said, but I'll regret it on a corner office salary. The study, still draped in fading light, bore silent witness. It wasn't just the estate being transferred, it was power. And for once, Eleanor wasn't just a bystander to the legacy, she was its architect. She walked to the fireplace and pulled a folded paper from a drawer, her father's letter to her. She hadn't needed to read it again, but the others would. He wrote letters to you too, Eleanor said, handing 2 envelopes to Meredith. His final words, unfiltered by legality. Reluctantly, they took them. Preston's hand trembled as he broke the seal. Miles read first. His eyes flicked quickly across the page, his expression a whirlwind of denial, realization, and something else. Shame. Preston's face flushed as he read, then paled. He crumpled the letter, then flattened it again on his knee. He knew, Miles said, barely above a whisper. About the insider trading and the embezzlement, Eleanor confirmed. We have all the documentation. You're blackmailing us, Preston said. No, Eleanor corrected. I'm offering you a way forward. Do the work, rebuild trust, and it all stays buried. Refuse, and the proper authorities will get everything they need. The air was still, not from peace, but the pause before a storm's second strike. Meredith leaned forward. Your father wanted you to learn that legacy isn't a gift, it's a test. You still have a chance to pass. And if we do? Miles asked. Eleanor met his gaze. After 1 year, you'll each receive 20% of the company's shares. Earned, not inherited. I keep controlling interest, but you'll have true influence, real responsibility. A full minute passed. Preston folded his letter again. Miles nodded slowly. I'll think about it, he said. You have 24 hours, Eleanor said. Just enough time to read everything you never bothered to before. She turned toward the window. The rain had stopped, Beyond the misty trees of Windermere Hall, a new horizon was forming. Behind her, two stunned brothers sat in their father's study, humbled at last, not by punishment, but by truth. The next morning began with an eerie calm. No storms, no drama, just a quiet, too quiet, stillness across Windermere Hall. It was the kind of peace that follows an earthquake, the silence that knows tremors can always return. Eleanor woke early, her mind spinning with the events of the previous day. The transfer of power wasn't just a legal formality, it had reshaped the entire structure of the Montgomery family. And the aftershocks hadn't finished rolling in. In the formal dining room, she found Miles already seated, his coffee untouched, staring into space. His letter from their father sat folded on the table. "Did you sleep?" she asked gently, pouring herself tea. "Barely," he admitted. "I kept hearing his voice. I didn't expect it to hit so hard." Eleanor nodded. She had gone through her reckoning months earlier, during long nights building Arcadia and longer conversations with Harrison. She'd wept, raged, forgiven, and finally understood. Miles looked up. "I know I've been a selfish ass. I got used to thinking it was all mine, that I was supposed to take over just because I was born first." "Second," Eleanor corrected softly. "Preston's the eldest." "Feels like I aged 20 years overnight," he sighed. She smiled. "That's what responsibility does." Preston joined them moments later, unusually subdued. No blazer, no sarcasm, just his letter in hand, creased and worn as though he'd spent the entire night reading and rereading it. "He remembered everything," Preston said. "Even the good things. My first debate competition. The time I helped bury a stray dog behind the barn so it could rest somewhere safe." Eleanor's throat tightened. Their father hadn't just seen their failures, he had remembered their humanity, their goodness, buried beneath the layers of entitlement and pride. "He always believed you both could be more," she said, "but he knew it had to be your choice." Meredith entered just then, crisp and composed. "If you're ready, we have business to finalize. There are stipulations that require your signatures, and you'll need to prepare for orientation at Arcadia." Preston groaned. "God help me, I haven't sat through orientation since undergrad." "This one might feel familiar," Meredith replied. "Same discomfort. Less beer." In the study, Eleanor brought out a thick binder labeled Succession Phase 2. "This details your responsibilities, roles, and a probation period. Every quarter you'll be evaluated by independent advisors. No nepotism, no shortcuts." Preston flipped through it. "So we're interns again." "You're starting where I started," she replied. "From the ground up." Miles sighed. "We deserve it." They signed, one after the other, inked lines that sealed their new reality. As they finished, Eleanor retrieved a final envelope from the desk drawer. "There's one more thing," she said. "Your father's personal journal. He wanted me to read you a passage if you agreed to move forward." She opened to a marked page, clearing her throat. "Legacy isn't forged in wealth or reputation. It's shaped by what we do when we think no one's watching. I've watched my children stumble, yes, but I've also seen the courage it takes to start over. Eleanor, if they choose redemption, remind them that it's not weakness to begin again. It's the beginning of strength." Silence fell again, this time not from tension, but from understanding. Preston nodded. He always knew how to say just enough. "We have a lot to unlearn," Miles murmured. "And more to build," Eleanor added. Meredith smiled faintly. "I'll see you at Arcadia tomorrow. 8 o'clock sharp, business casual, no exceptions." As she left, the siblings remained in the study. "I'm sorry, Ellie," Preston said after a moment. "Not just for the past few days, for years. For underestimating you." "I wasn't ready then," she replied, "but now I am. And I need you both to be ready too." They looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, not as the baby sister or the black sheep, but as the woman who had risen, quietly and powerfully to lead them. "We'll do it right," Miles said. "This time, we'll earn it." They didn't hug. They weren't there yet, but as they stood and gathered their papers, something unspoken passed between them. A beginning. Later, Eleanor stepped out into the fresh autumn air. Windermere Hall, still stately and solemn, watched her from its stone face. She breathed in the morning chill and whispered to the wind, "We're going to be okay, Dad. I promise." And this time, she meant every word. Monday broke over Boston with the kind of golden light that promised something new. For Eleanor, it wasn't just a workday. It was the first true test of whether her brothers would walk the path laid out for them or turn back. At 7:45 a.m. sharp, she walked into the Arcadia Venture Partners headquarters, her heels tapping with purpose. Her team greeted her with warm nods, but behind each polite smile was the same unspoken question, will they show up? By 8 o'clock they did. Preston entered first, dressed in a navy polo and gray slacks that made him look more like a confused MBA student than the high-powered attorney he'd once been. Miles followed, sleeves rolled, backpack slung over one shoulder, trying to mask nerves with casual charm. Eleanor met them in the glass atrium lobby, where Arcadia's mission statement glowed on a steel plaque. Ethics, impact, legacy. "Welcome to the real beginning," she said. Preston's lips twitched. "Didn't realize I'd be starting over in sneakers." "You're not the first executive to do so here," Eleanor replied, "and you won't be the last." They followed her to the orientation room where Bryn, a bright and efficient HR specialist, greeted them with the same enthusiasm she gave to every new hire. "Good morning. You've each got a welcome folder in front of you," she said. "It includes your ID badges, IT credentials, and your first assignments. Let's walk through the expectations." Preston flipped open his folder and stiffened. "Compliance oversight?" "You'll be shadowing Thomas Lee," Bryn said. "He's meticulous and no-nonsense. You'll learn a lot." Miles scanned his sheet. "Accounts receivable. I didn't even balance my own checkbook in college." "You'll be working with Nina Patel," Bryn replied, smiling. "She'll teach you patience and spreadsheets." Eleanor stood at the back, arms crossed, not interrupting. Letting them hear these things from someone other than their sister was part of the lesson. They needed to feel part of a system, not above it. By mid-morning, both men were being shown their desks, shared spaces with younger professionals, open floor plans, no private offices. Preston caught her in the hallway around noon. "I can't even get coffee without waiting in line," he said. "Welcome to the rest of the world," she answered. "How's it feel?" "Equal parts humbling and infuriating," he admitted. She smirked. "Sounds about right." Later that day, she received brief notes from both department heads. Preston stayed focused and asked good questions, Thomas wrote. "Could be promising if he stays consistent." Nina's note on Miles was equally direct, clumsy but eager. He apologized when he miscalculated. That's a good sign. By 6 p.m., Eleanor finally returned to her office. It overlooked the financial district skyline, glass and steel in every direction. Her father's journal rested on her desk, worn at the corners. She flipped to a familiar page. "A leader who remembers where they came from walks lighter and listens longer. Let them earn this. Let them stumble. Then they will rise." She ran her fingers over the ink. These weren't just words, they were a roadmap, and she was following it. She picked up her phone and called Meredith. They made it through day 1. Meredith chuckled softly. "Only 1,000 more to go." "And if they don't?" Then at least they knew what it meant to try. That night, the 3 siblings met back at Windermere Hall. No pretense, no confrontation, just a quiet dinner of leftover stew and fresh-baked bread. "I didn't think I'd last the day," Preston admitted over dessert. "But I did. Barely." Miles added, "I triple-checked one report before submitting it. Nina still found 2 mistakes. She smiled, though. That felt oddly nice." Eleanor raised her glass. "To first steps." They clinked glasses. Awkward but sincere. Later, Eleanor wrote in her own journal, "Today, they didn't lead. They followed. And in that following, they found pieces of themselves they'd forgotten. The part that listens, the part that learns. Maybe redemption isn't a grand gesture. Maybe it's a Monday morning with coffee, a spreadsheet, and the courage to ask questions. Tomorrow would come with new challenges, but for tonight, they had completed something most important, the first day of being more than what they'd been. And that, Eleanor thought as she turned out the light, was exactly what legacy was supposed to look like. Sunday evening arrived like a soft breath after a long, tense week. Windermere Hall, nestled among rust-red trees and the gentle hush of falling leaves, seemed to exhale too, as if the house itself was grateful for the return of peace, however temporary. In the grand kitchen, Eleanor moved easily from stove to countertop, her apron dusted with flour and a warm scent of roasted garlic and tomatoes hanging in the air. Lasagna was in the oven, Dad's favorite, not because it was fancy, but because it was layered, honest, and required patience, like family. At precisely 6:30, the sound of the front door opening echoed down the hall. "You're late," Eleanor called out. "Traffic," Preston replied, setting down a bottle of red wine. "I stopped at that little vineyard Dad used to like. Thought it might go with dinner." Miles followed, carrying a loaf of sourdough from a bakery downtown. "And I brought carbs. Because redemption needs bread." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Trying to bribe your way to forgiveness?" He grinned. "Trying to earn my seat." Dinner was served at the long oak table they had avoided for years, the one their father had always insisted they use on Sundays. Tonight, the table was set with navy linen, mismatched plates, and inherited candlesticks that still held their wax like frozen tears. They ate slowly, talked little, until Eleanor set down her fork and said, "Tell me something I don't know about you. Something true." Miles was first. "In college, I almost dropped out, not because I was failing, but because I felt invisible. I stayed because Dad called me every Thursday. I didn't realize he was the reason until now." Preston took a sip of wine. "You remember my first court win? The merger case?" Eleanor nodded. "I cried in the bathroom afterward, not because I won, but because I realized I'd done it for the title, not for the people it helped." Eleanor's voice softened. "He saw through both of you, you know. That's why he left you this path, because he believed the best in you was still possible." After dessert, they moved to the den where old photos lined the mantel, school plays, summer trips, and that one hideous sweater phase Miles never lived down. "Why lasagna?" Preston asked. "Because it reminds me of him," Eleanor said. "He used to say family was like pasta, better when layered with effort." She stood, walked to the cabinet, and retrieved a faded envelope. "He left one more letter, for all three of us." They leaned forward as she read, "If you're reading this together, it means you've chosen each other. I hoped you would. I always believed you would. Sunday dinners were never about food. They were about pause, about remembering that the people across the table matter more than the titles we chase or the grudges we nurse. Keep coming back to the table, even when it's hard, especially then." Silence settled, this time like a blessing. Eleanor looked at her brothers. "Same time next week?" Miles nodded. "I'll bring dessert." Preston smiled. "I'll try not to be late." They parted without ceremony, each returning to their lives. But something had changed. Not fixed, not perfect, but real. Eleanor stayed behind to clear the dishes, alone but not lonely. She washed each plate with deliberate hands, letting the rhythm of the task ground her. This wasn't just routine, it was ritual. Legacy, lived quietly. Later, in her journal, she wrote, "Today we didn't fix everything, but we remembered how to sit at the same table, and maybe that's the first real step in rebuilding a family." Downstairs, the clock in the foyer chimed once. The sound echoed softly through Windermere Hall, a heartbeat, the kind that says, "We are still here. We are still trying." And sometimes that's everything. The weeks rolled on, each bringing a new rhythm to the lives of the Montgomery siblings. What had begun as a tense experiment slowly morphed into routine, then habit, then something more enduring. The transformation wasn't loud or spectacular, but it was steady, persistent, and rooted in something real. At Arcadia, both Miles and Preston began to find not only competence in their roles, but a curious sense of purpose. Miles, once known for cutting corners and cashing bonuses, now stayed late poring over spreadsheets. He even double-checked his numbers before submitting reports. Preston, who had always viewed compliance as a nuisance, began to see the value in clarity and structure. Under Thomas Lee's firm but fair mentorship, he rediscovered the pride in precision and integrity. Eleanor watched it all from a careful distance. She knew better than to smother progress with praise, but every so often she'd leave a small note. "Strong work on the vendor audit. TL said you were sharp. Your quarterly projections held up in the review. Impressive." The notes were simple, handwritten, and never signed, but her brothers always knew, and they never threw them away. What surprised Eleanor the most wasn't their professional growth, it was the changes outside the office. One Sunday, Miles showed up early with a pie he had made himself. The crust was uneven and the filling slightly burnt, but he beamed with pride. "I used Mom's old recipe," he said. "She'd probably haunt me for the crust, but I tried." Preston, usually the last to arrive, texted one morning, "Running late. Don't start without me. I actually like this part now." It was such a small message, but it meant the world. Their dinners deepened. What started as reluctant confessions turned into laughter, stories, and reflection. They stopped performing and started participating. They listened more than they spoke. At one dinner, Eleanor pulled out an old family photo album. The brothers leaned over her shoulders, pointing out childhood memories. "Remember when you cut your bangs with Dad's scissors?" Preston chuckled. "And you tried to blame it on the dog," Miles added. They all laughed until they cried. For a moment, they weren't heirs or executives, just siblings. Then came the 6-month check-in. Meredith called a meeting in the Arcadia boardroom. The advisors, legal team, and Eleanor sat at one end of the table, Miles and Preston at the other. The lead evaluator, a quiet woman named Elise, read aloud, "Both candidates have shown marked improvement not only in skill but in attitude. They have demonstrated humility, initiative, and team collaboration." She paused. "Our recommendation is that they be advanced to Phase 3 with elevated responsibilities." Eleanor turned to them, a soft smile breaking through her usual calm. "You've earned this," she said, "not because of your name, but because of your effort." The brothers exchanged a glance. There was no gloating, only a quiet, mutual respect. That evening, back at Windermere, Eleanor shared something new over dinner. "I've been thinking about Phase 4, she said, passing the salad. Preston arched a brow. "There's a Phase 4? "Yes," she said. "Not from Dad, from me." She explained her vision, a new foundation that would support young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds, especially those without traditional business paths, a way to pay forward the second chance her family had just lived. "I want us to build it together, as equals," she said. "Not for press, not for praise, for purpose." Miles leaned back, thoughtful. "A legacy beyond us." Preston nodded slowly. "Let's do it." That night, after everyone left, Eleanor stood in the doorway of her father's old study. She looked around at the space that had once held arguments, tears, plans, and dreams. She whispered, "We're not there yet, Dad. But we're on the way." And that, she knew, was exactly what he had hoped for. 1 year to the day after the will was read, the Montgomery siblings gathered once more in the study at Windermere Hall. The weather mirrored that of the day their father's legacy was unveiled, cloudy, with a quiet stillness that made every breath feel meaningful. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, the room filled with soft lamplight and the smell of aged leather. On the coffee table rested a sealed envelope labeled, "Final Message, Play Only When Ready." "Are we?" she asked, looking between her brothers. Miles nodded, his eyes clear. "More than we've ever been." Preston chuckled softly. "Let's see what the old man's got left up his sleeve." Eleanor pressed play on the video. Their father's familiar face filled the screen. He looked relaxed, sitting in this very study, one hand resting on the arm of his chair. "My children," Harrison began, his voice even, warm. If you're watching this, you've walked the road I hoped you would. You've learned not just to lead, but to listen, not just to win, but to grow." He paused, eyes twinkling. "You've proven yourselves, so I'm giving you the final key." The video cut to a document, an amended version of the Montgomery Family Trust. Eleanor retains controlling interest in Arcadia, but Miles and Preston, you each now hold 20% of the company. An additional 10% has been placed in a new trust, not for you, but for your children, or for any child you choose to mentor. Legacy is not inherited, it's created. The room fell silent. Harrison continued, "There is one final clause: Sunday dinners, mandatory, for life, because no business, no deal, no ambition will ever matter more than this, your bond as family." He smiled, then added, "I'm proud of you, all of you. Now go build something even I couldn't imagine." The screen went black. No one moved for a while. "I didn't expect that to hit so hard," Preston finally said, his voice quieter than usual. Miles turned to Eleanor. "You've done more than just run the company. You kept us together." Eleanor shook her head. "Dad kept us together. I just followed the map." "No," Preston said, stepping forward. "You built the road." That evening, they sat down to dinner again, this time in Windermere's smaller breakfast nook, a more intimate space they hadn't used in years. Eleanor prepared a simple meal: roasted chicken, lemon potatoes, and the same arugula salad their mother used to make. They opened a bottle of champagne, one their father had kept in the wine cellar marked with a note, "For when they're ready." They toasted, not to inheritance or success, but to understanding, to failing and trying again, to being family by choice, not just blood. Later, Eleanor pulled out an old wooden box from the cabinet. Inside were childhood mementos, drawings, badges, letters, crayon-colored cards that read, "World's Best Dad." They passed each item around the table, laughing and tearing up in turns. "Look at this," Miles said, holding up a yellowing letter to Santa. "I asked for a robot and a pony. Very ambitious." "Here's your old science fair ribbon," Eleanor said, tossing it gently to Preston. He turned it over in his hands. "I was so proud of this. Dad made me rewrite the entire hypothesis 4 times. That's how he showed he cared," she said, "by making us better." They stayed up late talking about the business, about the past, about the kind of legacy they wanted to build from here. "I think we should open that mentorship fund sooner than planned," Miles said. "There are students who need the support now." Preston nodded. "And we should name it after Dad." "No," Eleanor said, surprising them both. "He'd want it named after the future." By midnight, they were back in the study. One last moment in the space where it had all begun. Eleanor lit the fireplace and pulled a wool blanket across her lap. She took out the family photo album and added a new picture to the final page, a candid shot from the dinner table, all 3 of them smiling, natural, whole. Legacy, she realized, wasn't a single moment. It wasn't the will or the trust or even the business. It was what happened after, in the quiet work, the hard choices, the dinners and the laughs and the small acts of grace that built bridges instead of walls. And for the first time since their father's death, Eleanor felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because everything mattered. She closed the album. Behind her, Miles was asleep in the armchair. Preston had dozed off with his head on the armrest. She whispered, "We did it, Dad." And somewhere in the crackling of the fire and the hush of the wind against the windows, she could almost hear him say, "Well done, Ellie. Well done." If this story touched you, subscribe to Secret Revenge, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.